Hey there, Kentucky Keepers. So this is another one of our modules in support of our 4-H invasive species education and monitoring program. And this one's going to be about kind of a handful of various invasive insect species that aren't necessarily a part of the Kentucky Keepers monitoring program using the app, but are still very important to our state in one way or the other. And there are still things that Kentucky Keepers can do to help us. So remember, we actually have monitoring programs where we use the Survey 123 app for spongy moth, imported fire ant, and spotted lanternfly, and along with the spotted lanternfly tree of heaven. But these are sort of some other creatures. We've actually got quite a few invasive species, so there's a lot to talk about. So once again, remember our goal for the Kentucky Keepers program is for 4-Hers, both 4-H staff, 4-H volunteers, and 4-H youth themselves to learn about invasive species, teach other people about invasive species, and maybe even help us find some of these things. Now, what do invasive species have in common? We've talked about this before, but invasive species are going to be something that's new to an area, usually from a different country or from a different continent. They tend to breed fast. They have lots of babies, they have lots of eggs, they spread lots of seeds, or they can grow and spread like a vine. They take resources from local plants or animals, or maybe they eat local plants or local animals. So they cause some kind of problem to our local things that are already living here. And because they're from a new area, a lot of times our local predators or plant eaters are just not adapted to feed on them. So there's nothing to stop them, and they just keep on spreading. Some things that invasive species, some characteristics that they sometimes have is that a lot of them are tough or venomous, or maybe they taste bad. There's something about them that makes them hard for creatures to eat. And a lot of times they're adapted for what we call disturbed areas. They do really well in places where humans have come in and we've ripped up the ground either to build roads or to build houses or maybe to plant crops. So we've left a big sort of sunny area with maybe bare patches of soil. A lot of our invasive plants and animals tend to do really well in those kinds of situations. But the official definition is that an invasive species is an organism that causes ecological or economic harm in a new environment where it is not native. So remember, we already have different modules. We have 3 specific modules that you can learn about these 3 creatures. So we have a module for spongy moth, one for spotted lanternfly and tree of heaven, and one for imported fire ant. So those are the ones that are kind of the focus of Kentucky Keepers because those are the ones where we use our app to try to monitor where they are in the state. So if you want to learn about those creatures, just remember that they have their own videos and modules to go with them, and this presentation is about a few other creatures.
This slide is a reminder to show you that there are a lot of invasive species that are either coming into Kentucky or are already here or that may be here shortly. And you may notice that I look different in this particular slide because we had to update this one. As some of you may have heard, the spotted lanternfly is now in Kentucky and it used to not be here. So what this picture is showing is a bunch of different creatures that are either on their way or already into Kentucky. From the north, you've got spotted lanternfly, emerald ash borer, Asian longhorn beetle, and spongy moth. So those are kind of coming to us from the north, and from the south, sugarcane aphid, Asian longhorn tick, imported fire ant, and a few others. The ones in the yellow arrows are ones that are already here, and the ones in the darker orange arrows are things that are not quite established in Kentucky yet. So we had to update this because spotted lanternfly used to be an orange arrow on this slide, and now it's a yellow arrow. So the main point of this is just to show you that there are a lot of invasive species that Kentucky is concerned about right now.
Now there are other invasive species in Kentucky too, so this presentation is just about insects, but remember that there's lots of different kinds of invasive species. You can be a plant, you can be a mammal, you can be a fish. Now many of these things are what we call naturalized. So in some of these cases, these are plants or animals that used to be an invasive species, and now they've pretty much invaded everything, and they aren't really spreading anymore, so they aren't always called invasive species, even though they still sort of are invasive species. A good example of that is dandelion. So dandelion is not native to the United States. It's only been here for a few hundred years. It was an invasive species initially because it came here and it started to spread. It spread like crazy. It's very hard to control it. But now it's pretty much all over the place anyway. It's kind of a part of the ecosystem now, whether we like it or not. So we call that naturalized rather than invasive. But it's still an example of something that has a lot of those same characteristics of an invasive species. So here's some examples of plants. We've got bush honeysuckle, kudzu, winter creeper, which is a very common vine in urban areas, multifloral rose. Autumn olive is a tree that was sometimes even planted to try to help establish disturbed ecosystems, to help turn disturbed ecosystems into a more natural ecosystem. And those trees have ended up becoming a big problem. Also something called Japanese stilt grass that shows up in a lot of roadsides and trails. Those are all the good examples of invasive species. And then some animals that you may have heard of. There's Asian carp that have really started to breed like crazy in western Kentucky freshwater. There's feral hogs. These are just regular old farm pigs that have gotten loose and have started to breed outdoors in the wild. And they cause lots of problems like ripping up people's crops. Regular old house cat, once they become outdoor and breed outdoors, they become a big problem for local songbirds and local rodents. And then, of course, European starling is a bird that's an invasive species. It's pretty much spread everywhere it's going to spread, but it's a very typical example of an invasive species. It breeds like crazy. Very few creatures will hunt it, and they're all over the place now. But now here are some of these other invasive insects in Kentucky. So this is Department of Entomology, so we're focusing more on insects, and there are a lot of invasive insects that are either in Kentucky now or came here a long time ago and are already what we call naturalized. So here's a whole bunch of these, a big list here. We've got Japanese beetle. Um, we've got Asian tiger mosquito. There's a picture of it down there. Asian tiger mosquito is the most common backyard mosquito in Kentucky. So if you're getting bit by mosquitoes around your house, it's probably by this creature, which is an invasive species. The seven-spotted ladybug is an invasive species. Also the multicolored ladybug, brown marmorated stink bug, European pine sawfly, spotted winged Drosophila, pepper moth, German roaches, hemlock woolly adelgid. There's just a huge list of these things. Some of these creatures are things that you may have seen many, many times and not realize they are an invasive species. So we're going to go through a few specific ones. So Asian multicolored lady beetle. This is one of our most common lady beetles that we see in Kentucky. There's actually lots of different kinds of lady beetles in Kentucky, and ladybug and lady beetle both mean the same thing. Those are both the same words that mean different words that mean the same thing. But the Asian lady beetle is pictured there. It tends to be kind of a pale colored ladybug with a lot of spots on it, but it can be a little darker colored as well. It's been in the United States since 1916. It was brought over on purpose to feed on aphids. So it was brought over on purpose to be a beneficial insect, but it's ended up causing lots of problems. And it's been in Kentucky at least since the 1990s. They do kill a lot of aphids and other pests, but the problem is they also kill our native ladybugs. So we have ladybugs that have been in Kentucky for thousands of years, and this creature kills those a lot as well, especially in the egg stage. These creatures lay lots of eggs. They have few predators, and one of the reasons they have few predators is because they put out a nasty tasting and smelling chemical where few predators will feed on them. But they also overwinter inside homes by the thousands, and they can smell bad. If they accidentally get smushed on the carpet, they can create stains. So they've caused a lot of different problems as an invasive species. Here's another example on the right, the brown marmorated stink bug. This one's only been here since around 2010 or so, but now it's pretty much found all over Kentucky and the eastern United States. These guys are a pest of plants. They feed on lots of different plants. They lay lots of eggs. They're a stink bug, so few predators will eat them. So these have lots of the classic characteristics of an invasive species. And also, like our Asian lady beetle there, they overwinter in homes by the thousands. So they come in, they overwinter in little cracks and crevices and in the attic. They die sometimes. They smell really bad. They don't really cause any problems in the house. but people certainly don't like having stink bugs walking around all over their house in spring and fall. Another example, this one's a little bit more serious, the hemlock woolly adelgid. This is a small creature related to aphids that feeds on eastern hemlock trees. It feeds on the leaves and it slowly kills the trees. So this is a creature that's already spread pretty much all over southeastern Kentucky and really all the places where we have a lot of hemlock. This creature is already there. It's from Asia. It breeds very fast, just like a lot of these things, and few predators will feed on it. It coats itself in this woolly stuff that's a waxy secretion that these things make them to where very few predators can find them and very few predators will feed on them. It was found here in 2006 and was already widespread through Kentucky within the next decade. So this is a creature that we don't really bother to monitor anymore, even though it's a very serious pest because it's pretty much spread everywhere it's going to spread in Kentucky. It's a good one to be aware of, and people who have this on their property, it's good for them to know about it because you can save individual hemlock trees by treating them with insecticides, but it is expensive, so you have to kind of make a decision as to whether you want to do that or not. So a good creature for Kentucky keepers to know about, but not one that we're really actively monitoring for anymore because it's kind of too late. Here's another one, the emerald ash borer. So this is a beetle. It's about a little less than an inch long. It's about the size of a 22 bullet. And it's very shiny. It almost looks like metal. It actually belongs to a kind of beetle group called the jewel beetles, which is they call them that because they are very shiny and kind of pretty looking. But even though it's pretty, it causes lots of problems. So it was native to Northeast Asia. It was found in 2002, so not that long ago, in Michigan, and now it's pretty much spread all through kind of the north central part of eastern United States. You see the dots there all over the place, all over going down into Georgia and Arkansas. Kentucky is already part of the quarantine zone, so there's really no point in monitoring this anymore. We were monitoring for it a few years ago, but there's no point now because it's once again it's kind of too late. It's all over the place. What this creature does is the beetle lands on an ash tree, it lays its egg, and then the larva burrows under the wood. And these guys kill trees within a year or so. Then when the larva turns into a pupa and comes out, the beetle flies to a new tree and lays more eggs. So these guys were able to spread, and it's hard to see them because of course the adults are very small, they're green, they blend in, and they just kind of move through the state very quickly. Once again, individual ash trees can be saved if you treat them early enough with insecticide. So that's something that Kentucky keepers can tell people who have an ash tree that maybe hasn't died yet, is that some of those trees can be saved. But really, the main thing we can do with creatures like emerald ash borer and hemlock woolly adelgid is to learn from them. We can use them as an example of what we don't want to happen. Emerald ash borer has pretty much wiped out all of the ash trees in Kentucky. We have a few left, but not many. And ash trees were once about 10% of the trees in our forest. So think about that. We've lost about 10% of our trees to just this one invasive insect. We don't want that to happen again. And that's how we can learn from these creatures. So we're going to talk about just a couple of life cycles from these creatures because once again we want to emphasize life cycles and some other science content in the Kentucky Keepers program because life cycle is something that every creature has, whether it's an invasive species or not. So emerald ash borer basically has one generation per year. Up at the top there you see the adult. The adult doesn't really do any damage. It might feed on some leaves, but it's not really a pest. The problem is that it lays eggs. The adults emerge from the trees in around May and June. Then they go to an ash tree, lay their egg, and you see on the right there, their eggs are very small. They put those on the bark. Then the egg hatches and the larva comes out and burrows under the bark. So the larva actually lives in between what we call the bark layer and the heartwood layer, and it kind of burrows underneath that, and eventually the bark starts to come off. So the larva is kind of a worm-like creature. It actually reminds me a little bit of a tapeworm. At their very largest, they might be an inch and a half or so long, and they're kind of whitish in color. You're not going to see them very often, though, because they hide under the wood. Then eventually, that larva turns into a pupa underneath the wood. That's the stage that spends the winter. And then in the next early summer is when the adults come out of that pupa. And the adults aren't around very long. They're just around for a week or so, a few weeks or so. They fly very quickly, so you're unlikely to see them. This is why these creatures are able to spread, is because the little beetle comes out, isn't around for a very long time. It spreads and lays its eggs before you know it, and then the cycle is started again. So that is the emerald ash borer life cycle. So what can Kentuckians do? How can Kentucky keepers help with emerald ash borer? And that's by telling its story. Tell people how this thing ran rampant through Kentucky and killed basically all of our ash trees in about 10 years. In particular, the lesson that we can learn from emerald ash borer will apply to the Asian longhorn beetle, which is a creature we're going to talk about a little later in this presentation. They have a lot of similarities. They both attack trees. The difference is Asian longhorn beetle is not really in Kentucky yet, so we might be able to stop it if we can learn our lesson from creatures like the emerald ash borer. And another thing we can tell people is if they have ash trees that are still alive, you can save them with insecticides. It just takes some work and some money to do that. But now we're going to talk about a couple of kind of new invaders. These are creatures that either aren't quite in Kentucky yet, but that are here and are new. Now, these are not creatures that we're actually monitoring with the Survey 123 app, at least not yet, but they are things that we can teach other people about and that can be reported using our Report a Pest email. So these two particular creatures are a high priority in Kentucky right now. They, along with the other things that we're already monitoring as far as Kentucky keepers goes, the spongy moth, the fire ant, and spotted lanternfly, are either recently arrived or are knocking on our borders right now. And these are the Asian longhorn beetle, that's the one on the left there, and the Asian longhorn tick. So similar names, but very different creatures. The Asian longhorn tick on the right. So in the rest of this module, we're going to go over the biology and the impacts of these two things, and then what can Kentucky keepers and other Kentuckians do to slow the spread of these things. So in general, how can Kentuckians help with Asian longhorn beetle and this Asian longhorn tick? Like I said, we're not monitoring them on the app, but there's still things that we can do. If you happen to find one of these two creatures, either you or this is knowledge you could pass on to someone else, if you find the Asian longhorn beetle or what you think might be an Asian longhorn tick, pick it up, put it in a little container like a Ziploc bag or a little Tupperware container and put it in your freezer. If a person can't actually collect the insect for some reason, you can also take a picture. Try to make note of the location of where you either caught or took a picture of this thing, either as an address or GPS coordinates, and I forgot to put date on there. Also put the date of when you saw it as well. And then who can you share this information with? You can take the creature or the picture straight to a county extension agent, or you can submit photos of these things directly to our Office of the State Entomologist. We've told you about this email before, and anyone can send photos of suspected invasive species to this email address. It's reportapest@uky.edu. So please try to spread the word about that email. Now we're going to go talk about the creatures specifically. So this is the Asian longhorn beetle, and its abbreviation is ALB. It is native to East Asia. It was first found in 1996 in New York. And since then, more have been found in small populations showing up here and there in Ohio, Illinois, and South Carolina. It's never been found in Kentucky yet, but as you can see down there, one of these populations has been found right on the southern part of Ohio. So it's very possible that some of those are already in that part of Kentucky and we just don't know about it yet. So that's why we're so concerned about this thing. This beetle, actually its larva, kills trees, especially maple trees. It actually kills quite a few different trees, but it's especially a problem on maple trees. And with this beetle, its larva actually burrows through the center of trees. So remember we said the emerald ash borer burrows underneath the wood, in between the bark and the main wood, but the Asian longhorn beetle, its larvae actually go into the heartwood and kill these trees. Now our goal with these creatures is not just to monitor them, we want to eradicate them. When the Asian longhorn beetle is found, it's actually possible to eradicate populations of it. That's sometimes difficult with some of our other invasive species, but that's the goal with this one, is we want them gone. So that's why we want people to tell us about them. Here's a little bit about what this creature looks like. So there's a cross section of a tree, and the adult is just sitting there on top of the tree, just to show you what the adult looks like. But those holes are what the larva does inside the tree. It's burrowing straight through these things and making tunnels. Very serious damage to a tree. A tree just can't survive that. And this is a stage that's actually doing the damage. The larva, as you can see, it's almost 2 inches long there. It's kind of white, almost grub-like, and lives inside the tree. You're very unlikely to see this thing because it's going to be inside the tree its whole lifespan. And by the way, neither of these stages, no part of the Asian longhorn beetle is dangerous to people. You can pick these things up. They'll walk around you or squirm around on you, as is the case of the larva, but they're totally harmless to you. So if you see one of these things, go ahead and grab it, put it in a little container so that you have a record of it. Once again, we talk about life cycles in Kentucky Keepers because life cycles is a part of the science content that we're trying to support with this project. So here's the Asian longhorn beetle life cycle. So there's the adult at the top. The adult itself doesn't really cause any damage. It lays eggs, and the eggs and the larvae are the parts that are actually in the tree. The adults emerge in May every year. They lay this egg that they actually put inside the wood a little bit. The egg hatches, and it turns into a larva. This is the full-size larva we have here. When it's first born, the larva is very small, but it sheds its skin a few times as it's tunneling through the wood, and eventually becomes a quite large white larva. And that stage is still continuing to feed until it is ready to turn into a pupa. And the pupa, as you can see, so the pupa is very similar to the cocoon stage of a butterfly. As you can see, it's starting to look like a beetle here. It's really forming all these shapes that's going to be a beetle. And the larvae actually take 2 years to develop, and the pupa is there for a little while, and then it comes out as a fully grown adult, and then the cycle starts once again with the adults mating and laying eggs. For identification, the eggs, the larvae, and the pupa are going to be hidden inside the tree, so you'll probably never see those. But what you may see are adult beetles and exit holes. So the adult beetle is very large. To me, it makes me think of about the size of a very small baby carrot, what they call petite carrots at the grocery store, where they've already taken the skin off, and it looks like a little round, sort of bullet-shaped carrot. That's about the size that these remind me of. So they're pretty large for a beetle. They are shiny, glossy black with white spots, and they have extremely long black antennae with white markings on them. So we have a few other beetles in our state that might look a little like this one way or the other. We certainly have lots of beetles that are called longhorn beetles that have the really long antenna, but we don't really have any that are shiny, glossy black with white spots. We actually have one called the cottonwood borer that's glossy white with black spots, so that's one you might get confused. But really, there's nothing else that quite looks like this. And remember, it's harmless to humans. They'll just walk around on you. They can't hurt you. So if you see one of these, you can pick it up, put it in a container, and then get it to somebody who will know what to do next. You can also sometimes see exit holes. If you see what seems to be an otherwise healthy maple tree or other large tree, and it's got very large holes in it. So as you can see, these holes are not quite as big as a dime, but you could put a Bic pin through them there. Those are where the pupa have already emerged and the adults have come out. That means that this tree is infested. It might be too late to save this tree, but this might let us know that they're in the area. So if you see very large exit holes like this, take a picture of that and put it in and send it through the report a pest email and let us know about it. You might also see, if you see these exit holes and big piles of what look like sawdust on the ground below them, that also could be an indicator. that Asian longhorn beetle is around. So what can Kentucky keepers and regular Kentuckians do to help with ALB? And one of the big things is not to move firewood. So these guys can be transported in firewood that has already been cut up. The larva and the pupa can still be in there, not fully developed yet, but still alive. So let's say if somebody is in Ohio and wants to go camping in Kentucky, it's a really bad idea to bring firewood from Ohio to Kentucky because these beetles have been found in Ohio. Similarly, it's not a really good idea to move firewood even within the state of Kentucky. So if you're in northern Kentucky and you're going camping down in southern Kentucky, we always recommend for people to use the firewood that they find or buy local to their campsite. I know that can be kind of expensive, especially if you're going to like a gas station and buying it, but it's really better for our state because it helps to not spread these creatures. So don't move firewood, and then keep a lookout for these beetles. And if you do find one, collect it in a container, put it in a freezer, take a picture of it, and either bring that picture or the beetle itself to a county extension agent, either a 4-H agent or what we call a natural agricultural and natural resources agent or a hort agent, and say, hey, is this that crazy beetle I heard about that eats trees? And then they'll report it to the entomology department and we'll know what to do next. Or you can send pictures of these things directly to our email address, reportapest@uky.edu. And now on to the Asian longhorn tick. So this is kind of a freaky creature. Get ready to be grossed out a little bit. So we already don't like ticks in Kentucky. We already have plenty of ticks to deal with, from Lone Star ticks to American dog tick. So many of our ticks are common, they spread diseases, and we don't like them. But now we have a new one to deal with. This is a new tick species from Asia, Asian longhorn tick, ALT. This one can be a really big problem on livestock. So what these guys can do is when they attach, they start to feed just like a regular tick does, but they're able to reproduce without mating. So a population can really quickly grow on a small area to the extent where you'll have livestock in an area that are really starting to be covered with dozens or hundreds of ticks because they breed so quickly. So remember how we say one of our traits of invasive species is that they can breed quickly. Well, this one can do it really quickly because it doesn't even have to mate. So they spread really quickly. It's possible for them to spread diseases in livestock, so that's a big problem. They are not known to carry any human diseases in the U.S. yet, but in other parts of the world, they have been known to transmit human diseases. So we're on the lookout for that. But the more we can find these guys and help control their populations, the better, because we don't want them starting to spread diseases among people. Here's the life cycle of the Asian longhorn tick. They start out obviously as eggs, and the eggs are going to be on the ground usually. They hatch into a six-legged form. So adult ticks have 8 legs. They're arachnids, they're related to spiders, they have 8 legs. But when they're very first born, they only have 6 legs. They attach themselves to some kind of host and get a blood meal. They stay on there for a little while. Then they drop off, and then they grab onto another prey item or a host, feed on that blood and drop off, and they do this essentially 8 times. They have 8 of these baby stages that they keep doing. And then finally, once they're an adult, they grab on to something like a cow or sometimes a person, and then they will start eating all this blood, and then they will lay lots of eggs. And once again, they don't have to mate to lay eggs, so they can breed really, really quickly. There's usually 1 generation a year of these things, at least in Kentucky. These guys have been found in the state, by the way, in certain areas, but not all over the state. So what can Kentuckians do? For one thing, Asian longhorn tick is another opportunity to teach people about general tick safety. So keeping yourself safe from Asian longhorn tick, the same method that you use for this creature would be good for all ticks. And we don't want any ticks on us ever, no matter what kind it is. So tick safety is the same for all kinds of ticks. One of the best ways to protect yourself is using repellents. You see that website there from the EPA. It's a way to select the best kind of repellent for you depending on kind of your situation and your age and so forth. Um, DEET-based pesticides tend to work really, really well, but there's some other ones that work well work well also. So check out that website to pick out repellents, and you should wear tick repellent pretty much anytime you're in what I would call a wild area. If you're in the forest, if you're in meadows, even if you're going to spend a lot of time in just like a city park. I found ticks in the grass in the backyard of Lexington, not Asian longhorn tick, but other kinds of ticks. So it's a good idea to practice tick safety really any place, especially that has long grass, trees, weeds, that kind of thing. And when you're in those areas where you think ticks might be common, it's a good idea to do a tick check really every few hours. When we are at camps with youth, we tend to recommend to do a tick check once in the morning, once at lunch, once at dinner, and then again at night. And I mean a thorough tick check all over your body because these things can be hard to find. And we also recommend to not walk through places with high grasses and weeds if possible. So if you're in a forest, try to stick to the trail. And when you do find a tick, remove them as soon as possible with a tweezer, and you can see the appropriate method there. You're supposed to grab them right behind the place where they've attached themselves. So they attach themselves with their mouths on your skin here. You're supposed to grab them with the tweezers right behind there and pull upwards. We don't want to twist them as you're pulling because that can break off their body parts in your skin, which can cause other problems like infections. You want to pull them up and out. And this is something that's good knowledge for anyone, whether they're dealing with Asian longhorn tick or any kind of tick. And this is another way that Kentucky keepers can help. If someone that you know finds livestock that just seems to be absolutely covered with ticks, this could be Asian longhorn tick. So if someone suspects ALT, try to grab some specimens and bring them to your local extension office, or once again use our report a pest email to let us know about this. So you can see there, I mean, animals are going to have ticks from time to time, but when you have lots and lots of them all over a cow or a horse or something like that, it could be ALT because the Asian longhorn tick does breed so quickly in such a short amount of time. So how can Kentucky keepers help? Once again, we want you to learn. The more you guys, whether you're 4-H staff or a 4-H'er, the more you learn about invasive species, the more you can spread the words to others, the more likely you'll be able to spot one of these things if you happen to see it out there. And then, of course, you can educate other people about them. You can do school reports. You can do presentations at your church or at your 4-H office and let people know about the Report a Pest email so that if someone sees an Asian longhorn tick or an Asian longhorn beetle, they can tell us about it. So that's it for this presentation. Please let us know if you have any questions about either the creatures themselves or in the case of some of our other creatures, how to use the app, or if you have questions about the Report a Pest email. So hopefully we'll see you on another one of these presentations.